3, we're going to be talking about subtracting integers today. So last lesson we were talking about adding integers, and this lesson we're going to be talking about subtracting integers. So there are two things to keep in mind when you're subtracting integers. The first thing is that when you're subtracting an integer, it's almost like adding its additive inverse. So what do I mean by that? If you remember, additive inverses are, like an example, are like 1 and -1, 8 and -8, things like that. So if you're subtracting an integer like 6 minus 8 equals -2, you can think of it as, almost if you prefer to add, you can think of it as 6 plus -8 equals -2. No matter which way you do it, you're going to get the same answer, but sometimes it might come in handy, like in this situation down here. -3 minus 5 equals -8. Sometimes when you're, subtracting with a negative, it's a little bit easier to add two negatives instead. So instead of doing -3 minus 5, -3 plus -5 is almost a little bit easier to add in our head to get the solution. Another thing to think about is that when you're subtracting with a negative number, it's almost like adding. For example, so if you do -4 minus -10 equals 6, it might be easier for you to think of it as -4 plus 10 equals 6. So instead of having a minus negative, you could just plus a positive number instead. So let's do a few examples and we'll see what we get. Alright, let's look at our first example. Our first example says 8 minus 11. Just a second ago we talked about if you're subtracting a number, you can add its inverse instead, and that might be a little bit easier sometimes. So let's practice this. So instead of saying 8 minus 11, it might be easier for you to think 8 plus -11. Now this brings us to what we were talking about in the last lesson. The last lesson we talked about adding integers, so now let's go ahead and put into practice what we did last lesson. So if you're adding a negative number, and the negative number is the biggest one, we know that our answer is going to be negative, right? Because whatever our biggest number is, the sign, our answer is going to be that same sign. So our biggest number is a negative. So we know our answer is going to be negative. So if you take it away, you'll find out that your answer is -3. Alright, let's go ahead and look at number 2. This is the one where we are subtracting a negative number. So if you remember what we just talked about a second ago, if you're subtracting a negative number, it's almost like adding. So if we do -2 minus a -8, we can change this to an adding, a positive sign, and we can do -2 plus 8, which will give us 6. And we know that our answer is positive because our biggest number is positive. Alright, our third example. It says 16 minus -12. So just a second ago, we just did a minus negative. We turned it to a plus positive. We're going to do that same little strategy down here. So 16 plus 12 is going to give us 28. Alright, now we are going to be plugging in some numbers for our variables so that we can solve our expression. So this expression says x plus y minus z. And that is if x is equal to 10, y is equal to -4, and z is equal to -15. So let's go ahead and first plug in our variables. Okay, so the first one is x plus y, so plus -4 minus z. So let's see what we have to do. I'm looking through 10 plus negative, so we're adding a negative number. And then we're subtracting a negative number, which is like adding. So I'm going to change these to positive signs to make it a little bit easier for us. And now, if you remember, with our order of operations, we work from left to right when we're adding and subtracting. So let's go ahead and work from left to right. So 10 plus -4 gives us 6. And then 6 plus 15 gives us 21 is our answer. Alright, let's go ahead and try to solve a word problem. It says a gopher begins at 7 inches below the surface of a garden and digs down another 9 inches. Find an integer that represents the gopher's position. Alright, so we are going to try to write an expression and then we're going to go ahead and solve it with integers. So our gopher begins at 7 inches below. So just like in the last lesson when we heard the verbal phrases and we turned it into integers, we're going to do the same thing for this one. So if we have 7 inches below, we know that below is talking about negative. So we're negative 7 inches. And then the gopher goes ahead and digs down another 9 inches. And this word down tells us that it's going to be a negative 9 because we're going down further. So it's going to be negative. So minus 9 equals. Now let's go ahead and use our little tricks to solve this. So instead of subtracting a number, we can go ahead and add its inverse. So now we can go ahead and use the rules of adding integers like we did in the last lesson to solve this one. So when we're adding two negative numbers, remember you just add them and you keep your negative sign. So 7 plus 9 gives us 16, and then we can go ahead and keep our negative number. All right. As always, make sure you have your notes done. Make sure that if you have any questions, you come in with them tomorrow, or you can reference back in your book to the examples. But before next class period, I want you to try a few problems for me. All right, here are 4 problems I would like you to try before class tomorrow. Good luck.